If the Shang dynasty ruled through ritual and fear, then the Zhou dynasty ruled through an idea that would shape Chinese politics for 4,000 years, the mandate of heaven. But before the idea, there was a man. His name was King Wen of Zhou. At the time, the Zhou were not an empire. They were just a Western state on the edge of Shang power. Not the richest, not the strongest, just respectable. But King Wen had something more valuable than bronze weapons. He had a reputation, and he knew how to use it. There's a story about him that survived for centuries. Maybe it's true, maybe it's propaganda. But either way, it tells us how he wanted to be seen. One day, an old farmer came to the Zhou court. He had a land dispute. His neighbor had moved the boundary stones, stealing part of his field. In most ancient kingdoms, the king wouldn't even hear such a case. A dispute between peasants? Beneath royal attention? But King Wen did something different. He walked out of the palace. He went to the field himself. He looked at the stones, listened to both sides, and ruled in favor of the old farmer. The story spread quickly. The Zhou king listens to farmers. Compare that image to the last Shang ruler. His name was also Zhou, different character, same pronunciation. He was rumored to be so drunk at court that ministers had to shout to be heard. King Wen wasn't just building an army, he was building a story. And in politics, a good story is worth 10,000 soldiers. Under King Wen, the Zhou state grew stronger. Taxes were lighter. Laws were more predictable. Refugees and talented officials drifted westward. But King Wen never saw the fall of the Shang. He died before the final confrontation. The task of overthrowing the old dynasty fell to his son, King Wu. In 1046 BCE, King Wu marched east with a coalition of allied states. Their target was the Shang capital. The two armies met at a place called Muye. On the Shang side, an enormous army. Bronze armor, war chariots, veterans of generations of warfare. Some sources say hundreds of thousands of troops. On the Zhou side, maybe 50,000 men, farmers, militias, allied forces who had never fought together before. On paper, the outcome looked obvious. But battles are not decided on paper. They are decided in the minds of soldiers. Before the battle, King Wu gave a speech. We don't have the full text, but fragments survived. He didn't talk about glory. He didn't talk about revenge. He talked about wages. The Shang soldiers, he said, haven't been paid in months. Their families are starving. They fight because they have no choice. We fight because we believe. Then he made a promise, one that echoed an older rebellion, centuries before. Lay down your weapons and live. Switch sides, and you will be rewarded. When the armies clashed, something extraordinary happened. The Shang front lines stopped. They didn't charge. They didn't fight. They just stood there. Then, one by one, entire units turned around. Some dropped their weapons. Others pointed spears at their own officers. The Shang generals tried to rally the troops. But when your own soldiers refuse to fight, what can you do? The Shang king watched as his army dissolved in front of him. He turned his horse and fled toward the capital. When he arrived, he climbed to the top of his burning palace and threw himself into the flames. The dynasty that had ruled for centuries ended in a single fire. But the real challenge came after the victory. Because overthrowing a king created a dangerous question. If the Shang kings ruled because their ancestors were chosen by heaven, then what did that make the Zhou? Traitors? Criminals? Rebels against the cosmic order? The Zhou needed a new explanation, so they introduced a revolutionary concept, the mandate of heaven. The idea was simple. Heaven granted the right to rule, but that right depended on virtue. If a king ruled well, heaven supported him. If he became cruel or corrupt, heaven withdrew its support. And once the mandate was gone, rebellion was no longer a crime. It was a duty. It was circular logic. But it worked because it gave every political revolution a script. And in politics, a good script can be more powerful than an army. But here's the part most history books skip. For ordinary people, the mandate of heaven was revolutionary. Before the Zhou, if you lived under a bad king, you had two options: suffer in silence, rebel and be executed as a traitor. After the Zhou, there was a third option: claim the king had lost heaven's mandate and you were restoring cosmic order. It didn't always work. Most rebels still lost, most still died, but now they had something new: a justification, a narrative weapon. And sometimes a narrative weapon is more dangerous than a real one. Now, King Wu faced another problem. He had just conquered a huge territory. Imagine conquering an empire the size of ancient Egypt, but with Bronze Age technology. No phones, no roads, no postal system. How do you control that? The Zhou solution was simple, but risky. They outsourced it. King Wu divided the land like slicing a pizza. Each slice went to a relative, ally, or loyal general. They ruled their territory in his name, collected taxes, and raised armies. In exchange, they pledged loyalty to the Zhou king. This system is often called feudalism, but it wasn't exactly like medieval Europe. Think of it more like a franchise model. Corporate headquarters, the Zhou king in the capital. Franchise owners, regional lords in their territories. The deal? You use our brand, Zhou Dynasty, you pay tribute, and we don't micromanage. For a while, it worked beautifully. For about 250 years, the system held together. Tribute flowed, rituals were performed, bronze bells rang in harmony. But remember the franchise problem? By 771 BCE, some regional lords had ruled their lands for generations. Their great-great-grandfathers had sworn loyalty to King Wu. But what did they owe King Wu's great-great-grandson, especially when he was weak? The king at the time was King Yu of Zhou, and he made a catastrophic mistake. He fell in love with a concubine named Bao Si. She rarely smiled. So to amuse her, he played a prank. He lit the emergency beacon fires, the warning system for barbarian invasions. Regional lords rushed to the capital with their armies, but there was no invasion. It was a joke. Bao Si laughed. The lords didn't. A few months later, when real raiders attacked, King Yu lit the beacons again. This time, nobody came. The raiders killed the king, looted the capital, and carried Bao Si away. The Zhou royal family fled east to a new capital at Luoyang. This moment split Zhou history into two periods: the Western Zhou, when the king had real power, and the Eastern Zhou, when he didn't. They still called themselves kings, but everyone knew the truth. The franchise owners had stopped answering headquarters calls. What followed was centuries of chaos, but productive chaos. The Zhou king still sat on a throne in Luoyang. Diplomats still visited him. Rituals still happened. On paper, he was the son of heaven. In reality, he controlled a territory about the size of a modern city. Meanwhile, the regional states became powerful. Qin in the west, military, disciplined, efficient. Chu in the south, rich, vast, culturally distinct. Q in the east, commercial and intellectual. Jin in the north, military giant, later split into rival states. Each state raised armies, minted currencies, wrote laws. They fought constantly. They were basically independent countries, pretending to belong to one kingdom. It was a bit like post-Roman Europe, many kingdoms all claiming to be the true heir of Rome, but actually fighting each other constantly. The difference? In China, the illusion of unity mattered. Every state claimed to defend the Zhou order. Every warlord said he was fighting for the king, not against him. Why? Because of the mandate of heaven. If you wanted to rule all of China, You couldn't just conquer it. You had to justify it. You had to prove heaven chose you. That need for a story is what kept Chinese political culture unified, even when China itself was divided. The Zhou Dynasty lasted more than 800 years, at least in name, but its real legacy wasn't its longevity. It was the idea it left behind. A ruler did not rule simply because of his bloodline. He ruled because he deserved to rule. And if he didn't, he could be replaced, all under one claim. Heaven has spoken. But here's the question the Zhou never answered. Who gets to interpret what heaven said? The Zhou created a system where power depended on virtue, but they never created a system to measure virtue. So every rebel could claim heaven's approval. Every tyrant could claim heaven's mandate. And the only way to know who was right, wait and see who wins. The Zhou gave China a political philosophy that lasted 3,000 years. But they also gave it 3,000 years of civil wars, each side claiming to speak for heaven. Maybe that's the price of a good story. When you tell people that bad rulers can be overthrown, you can't be surprised when everyone thinks they're the one who should do the overthrowing. The Zhou proved that dynasties could fall. They just didn't realize they were proving it about themselves.